Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Kara Ripley and I am the Adult Services Librarian at the Oregon Public Library. I am so happy to welcome you here to our virtual program on Paranormal Wisconsin, led by Chad Lewis. We are going to get started in just a few moments here. I have a couple housekeeping items that I want to go through. Everybody should be muted. That was something that I set up with the program, but it looks like a few people are somehow getting unmuted. Not sure how. So don't be alarmed if I go through and mute you again. This is so we can get a good recording for the presentation. And then also for everybody's privacy, I thought I turned off everybody's video. But there are a couple people that I'm still seeing their video, so I'm going to go ahead and shut that off. So also don't be alarmed if your video goes away. So if at any point throughout the presentation you have a question, please feel free to enter the question in the chat. And then Chad will pause for questions and I will go ahead and answer the question or ask the questions for Chad to answer them. I will go ahead and mute myself now. And if you have any questions or any technical problems throughout the program, please just put that in the chat. To get to the chat, move your mouse around on your computer. And then there is a box at the bottom of the screen that says chat. And so you can click on that and then start a chat with me or with everyone. So, all right, without any further ado, Chad, take it away.
Well, hello and welcome everyone. First, I'd like to thank the library for putting this together this evening. But just as important, all of you who were brave enough to show up to talk about Paranormal Wisconsin from the safety of wherever you're watching this program. My name is Chad. One second here. I think we'll go. There we go. And I'll be your presenter this evening. And although my background is actually in the field of psychology, for the last 25 years, I've been traveling the world in search of the strange and unusual. Everything from hunting for vampires in Transylvania, looking for the Loch Ness Monster, crop circles, UFOs, alien abductions, really weird people, odd places, you name it. If it's just strange and a little offbeat, I've traveled around the globe in search of it. But what I discovered on my travels is that sometimes the weirdest things happen right in your own backyard. So that's what we're going to explore tonight. Some of Wisconsin's scariest and strangest stories. For the next 45 minutes or so, we will take a tour across the entire state. I'll give you the background, the folklore, the eyewitness accounts. I'll talk a bit about some of our research at these places. Heck, I'll even provide you with the directions to these places. But I'm going to leave it up to each and every one of you, whether you're a diehard skeptic or a true believer or somewhere in between, to go to these places on your own and determine for yourself whether or not you believe the legends. Many of us have seen programs on TV about ghosts, UFOs, and monsters, but it's a much different matter when you're out there looking for yourself. Because when you're out in the middle of nowhere and you see that shadowy creature lurking from tree to tree, you simply can't turn to another channel and forget all about it. So with that in mind, let's explore some of the weirdest cases Wisconsin has to offer. First stop, UFOs, unidentified flying objects. Now, of course, the media likes to pretend the only reason people believe in UFOs, the only reason people see UFOs is because of Hollywood. TV shows like the X-Files and unsolved mysteries, movies like Men in Black and Independence Day. But it should come as no surprise that we have reports of UFOs here in Wisconsin, because not only do we have the UFO capital of the world here, we have 3 of them. The towns of Elmwood, Bellevue, and Dundee all claim to be the UFO capital of the world. All 3 will have UFO Day festivals where you can go and celebrate UFO activity. Now, one of the weirdest cases you will ever hear came in Eagle River, Wisconsin, a small little tourist town. 1961, it happened to this gentleman, Joe Simonton, a plumber and part-time farmer. Simonton was having a late breakfast, early lunch one day, when all of a sudden he noticed out his window this craft start to descend into his yard. He described it as being about 30 feet wide, 12 feet high, with all these little muffler type rings on it. I have to give Simonton credit. He had really no interest in UFOs, hadn't given the topic much thought. So when he saw this descend into his yard, he wasn't afraid. He was curious. And rather than just sit in his house and watch it, he went out to interact with it. When he walked up to it, he said an opening appeared on it, like the hatch to your trunk. And up to the front came one of the pilots, the inhabitants, the alien, the human, whatever it was. Simonton saw a couple others on board. They were all identical looking. They were all very short, with darker skin, hair, and eyes. Simonton said the eyes were so piercing he couldn't even look at them in the eyes. He said they all reminded him of very small Italian men. The leader seemed to have some sort of glass or container, and Simonton realized that they wanted water. So Simonton went into his house, filled the jug up with water, and when he came back, he handed it to the man. He looked inside, and one of the things seemed to be cooking something over a flameless type grill. At this point, there was no verbal communication. So Simonton pointed to the man seemingly cooking and gave a motion to his mouth like, is he eating? Trying to get some type of conversation going. The leader recognized Simonton's interest, went over and traded him for the water by giving him several of what the media were calling UFO saucer cakes or pancakes from outer space. I told you this was going to be a weird story. Simonton had no idea, but at the same time, he was exchanging this water for UFO cakes. Other people in the area were calling in with their reports of UFOs in the area. I talked to one gentleman who was a teenager at the time. He lived next to Simonton down the road. He said him and his mother and some friends were out back playing when they saw a craft fly over their house heading toward Simonton's. After the exchange was made, the hatch door simply closed and the object took off, flew out of Simonton's view. Simonton had no idea when his story went national, the attention that it would make. In fact, he was swamped with phone calls and people visiting his farm. In the first week after his story went national, over 1,000 people showed up looking for those alien pancakes. Simonton ate one of those pancakes, said it was the worst tasting pancake he'd ever had. He said, no wonder these things are so small. If this is what they're eating, I feel terrible for them. The others he sent in for analysis. Some say they came back as nothing more than the buckwheat pancakes you make at home. Others say they had ingredients not of this world. Simonton, until the day he died, believed that he had encountered something not of this earth. In fact, many claimed that he had other sightings. But like a lot of witnesses whose stories go national or viral nowadays, they wish they never would have reported it. that they wish they would have simply kept their mouth quiet. And that's exactly what happened with Simonton. Others who knew him said he had other sightings, but he simply would not talk about it because of all the negative attention he received. And it's one thing to trade water for pancakes with these things. It's another when they seemingly take you against your will. That's exactly what happened to a family up in Bloomer, Wisconsin. For decades, they had had weird encounters. Usually they would chalk it up to nightmares and bad dreams or even hallucinations. That is until one night when the mother was sleeping in her bed. This is not her. She was sleeping in her bedroom. This is her bedroom. And she awoke in the middle of the night with the urge to go to the bathroom. Nothing out of the ordinary there. So she walks back to the back of the house where her bathroom is. It would be right at the bottom of the screen you're looking at. But as you can see out her back, she has some windows overlooking her backyard and then a heavily forested area. As she walked back to use the restroom, she noticed what appeared to be strange lights hovering over the trees. As she paused to look, she realized several things. One, they weren't just lights. They seemed to be attached to some sort of craft. Based on the distance, she wasn't quite sure how big the thing was. She thought maybe the size of a house. The second thing she had noticed was that the lights weren't stationary. They were moving slowly toward her house. Now, here's the odd part. As she's sitting in the back of her house in the middle of the night, having to go to the bathroom, watching a UFO in her backyard, her first thought was, did I lock the front door? Kind of an odd thought to have, but you'll see why she thought it in a moment. She goes rushing to the front door. She told me when she got there, out the window, she could see weird balls of light similar to these floating in her front yard. She immediately thought to herself, I'm too late. They're already here. At that moment, her door began to open on its own, and a heavy fog rolled in. She said she braced herself against the door, trying to shut it, but it kept opening in a consistent pressure, not as though somebody was kicking it in like an intruder might, but just a constant pressure. That's when she heard someone or something tell her in her mind, stop acting like a child. You know you can't stop us anyway. The last thing she recalled was the fog rolling in, and a hand appeared coming in from around the doorway, trying to grab at her. She claimed that that hand wasn't human, that the hand looked more like this, some sort of alien hand. Next thing she knew, she was back in the back of her house watching the UFO. But this time it was leaving. It was heading out. Next thing, she woke up in her backyard the next morning in her bed. Again, this is not her. And she thought it was nothing more than a dream, like she had had so many times before. That is until she went out the next morning with her husband and kids to the backyard where that UFO was hovering, and she noticed this burn mark in her backyard that wasn't there previously. Now, she also agreed to undergo hypnosis. Under hypnosis, she recalled being taken that night by 3 creatures she described looking like this. She didn't know what to call them, but she called them creatures, but those of us in ufology know these as the Greys. The large, oval-headed, almond-eyed creatures reported in a majority of the cases we received. She was brought on board and underwent some medical procedures. She didn't know what they were doing. But what terrified me the most, sitting, listening to her recount this under hypnosis, was the fact that she claimed every time she's been brought on board, she could recognize upwards of a dozen other human beings on board. She didn't recognize them as friends or family, but she recognized that they were human. She still has reports as of today of weird things still going on, but she seems to have made peace with it, thinking that it's all part of a greater plan and she's just a part of it. And she's not alone. Every year we receive hundreds of reports of people seeing something in Wisconsin skies that they simply cannot explain. So I'm going to pause here one moment. If someone could put, if you can hear me, just please put in the chat room that you can hear me. For some reason, my screen is showing that the microphone is not on. But if you could, if you're hearing this in the chat, let me know and I'll quick take a peek at that. When you,
I can hear you loud and clear.
oh, perfect, good. When you're dealing with the paranormal, sometimes oddities happen when you're doing presentations on the strange and the weird. But if you'd rather not look into the sky in the evening for all of our UFO sightings, you may want to stick to dry land. For our next category, we're going to talk about perhaps the most infamous mysterious creature out there. Creature known as Bigfoot, known throughout the world as the Bigfoot, the Yeti, the Yowie, the Sasquatch, the abominable snowman. When most people think of these creatures, they often think of the heavily forested western states of the US. They don't often think of the Midwest. But every year I receive dozens of reports from people who have come face to face with what they believe to be a Bigfoot-like creature. One of my favorite cases came back in 2000 in Granton near Neillsville. It happened to this gentleman, James Hughes. He was a farmer and also delivered newspapers in the morning. One morning, while finishing up his route, he was heading home just a few miles from his house on a road he knew very well. Way up in front of him, he noticed a big object on the side of the road. He slowed down thinking it might be a bear or some other animal. He didn't want to hit it, roadkill, and damage. But as he got closer, he realized it wasn't a bear at all. In fact, it seemed to be walking upright on its hind legs. By all accounts, it seemed to be a Bigfoot-looking creature, 7 feet tall, 300 to 400 pounds. What terrified Mr. Hughes is the creature seemed to be carrying some dead animal in its hand. Whether it was a deer or a goat, Hughes did not know, because he told me he was more terrified of the monster's eyes that were staring right at him. He almost came to a stop and swerved his car off the road. He was so frightened by what happened. He quickly drove home as the creature scurried back into the woods. He told his wife about it, but he didn't want to report it. He knew how it sounded, but he was concerned that this thing might be dangerous. So the next day he made his report. An officer came over and together they looked for prints or hair or droppings, something that would prove the creature was there. They didn't find anything. A couple days later, I made my way to Mr. Hughes's farm. I interviewed him. What I noticed is right down the road, a farmer had a lot of livestock. Thinking that maybe that's what the beast was carrying, I interviewed the farmer, who told me he was not missing any of his livestock. Soon after his report came out, many of his neighbors came up to him and told him that they too had seen a Bigfoot-like creature. They were simply too afraid to report it because they thought the neighbors would think they were crazy, which is also a common theme with witnesses of the supernatural. But not every case lives on forever. That's evidenced by this town. It's called Steinthal. Today, there's nothing in Steinthal. It's a ghost town, maybe literally. But in the 1960s and 1970s, Steinthal was the paranormal hotbed in Wisconsin. It all began with this old abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Mostly young people would drive out to the land to go see the house. They believed the house was haunted. They would see mysterious lights moving about inside the empty place. They would see shadowy figures. They could hear voices of people talking, but nobody seemed to be there. So many people ventured out to this house that it took on its own story, because surrounding the house was a bunch of swampland, of marshland, as you can kind of see in this old grainy newspaper picture of the area. That's when the story started growing about a Bigfoot looking creature, 7 feet tall, with glowing green eyes. And when I say green eyes, I mean eyes plural, because many witnesses claim that it had 3 green eyes staring back at them. The newspapers had no idea what to call this thing, so they called it the Thing. Most people would go to the old Steinthal Tavern, which is no longer there. It's now at the site of where this chapel is. They would go there and grab some drinks and sit out on the front looking for the Steinthal monster. Or at least I assume that's why they were there. Everything I found about the place was a bunch of ads about exotic dancers being there every weekend in the 60s and 70s. But they would stare out the front across the street where my colleague Kevin Nelson is. That was the site of the old mill. And that's where the Steinthal monster was spotted several times as well. But what became of the Steinthal monster? Where did it go? Is it still there? If it is, the reports are not circulating any longer. Did it move on to other parts of the state? I'll leave it up to you to head to Steinthal and come to your own conclusion. And then there are places where not only do you get one haunted story, you get a little bonus as well. And this is not too far from where many of you are probably listening from this evening. It's not too far from Oregon. It's right outside of Evansville, a place called Weary Road. One of those roads that everybody seems to know it has a paranormal reputation. The legend dates back to a man named Old Man Weary. It was said that while he was alive, he was a terrible person, abused children, was mean to everyone, even though all evidence points that he was just a regular, nice gentleman who lived in the area. But that hasn't stopped people from going out there for the legend, as evidenced by the amount of graffiti you see in this photograph. The legend is he haunts the area. Those who go to the bridge where my colleague Kevin is standing report seeing shadowy figures moving about. They hear disembodied voices talking, but when they look around, they're surrounded by swamp land and crops. It's also on the bridge paranormal activity is supposed to happen with the dare. A lot of these haunted places have dares attached to them. You have to do something in order for the legend to come true. And one of the dares at Weary Road is that if you park your car on the bridge and turn it off, your car will not start up again. And that's when Old Man Weary's spirit will come and try to chase you out of the area. He always seems to approach from the back end of the vehicle. Some even claim that he has thrown a brick through their back windshield, trying to scare them out of the area. But I know what you're thinking. This is nothing more than teenagers with their imaginations. But I spoke to a woman a couple years ago who was up there in age. She had been to Weary Road many times through her life, but she had some friends visiting who had never been there. She thought it would be a fun little trip to take them out there. So they went out there, and immediately they got the feeling that they should not be there. Something was creepy. Something was off. They didn't like it. But while they were debating whether or not they should leave, they looked over and noticed this giant creature right next to them on the bridge. She claimed it was the size of a bear, but it was shaped more like a wolf or a dog. To make matters worse, in the picture she drew, she said it had glowing yellow eyes and big fangs. Here's the odd part, though. Even though she was in the presumed safety of her vehicle, she felt that if she wouldn't have left that area immediately, that this thing would have tried to harm or kill her. And that's very common with people who have these experiences. It's almost as though they have an irrational fear or are in a zone of fear because they're scared until they finally get home and calm down. Usually they're a little shy and embarrassed about how frightened they became. But she told me she vowed never to set foot on Weary Road again as long as she lives. But again, if you'd rather not go chasing these yellow-eyed monsters, maybe dip your toes in some water. Here I am on one of my expeditions over to Loch Ness looking for the Loch Ness Monster. I'm the one in the blue without the really cool beard. Little did I know if I wanted to see sea serpents, I should have stayed in Wisconsin. You see, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Wisconsin was overrun with sea serpent reports. I've collected over 40 different lakes, rivers, and streams in our state that all claim to have had or have a serpent in them. In fact, if you were a tourist town and you did not have a sea serpent story back then, you were behind the times, losing out on Chicago tourists coming up to our lakes. One of my favorite sea serpent legends happens in a place of mystery and history. Devil's Lake State Park, the most visited state park in the entire state. It has a long history of being known for its effigy mounds. Effigy mounds were sacred burial grounds, often raised up in the earth in the shape of an animal that could be best viewed from the sky. There are still several of these effigy mounds at Devil's Lake State Park. At one point, it's thought we had 20,000 of these effigy mounds in our state. However, today, we have less than about 4,000 of them still remaining. The lake itself is thought to be a paranormal beacon or window area. The name was translated into Mystery Lake, Spirit Lake, Sacred Lake, and of course, Devil's Lake. The sides of the lake were said to have been formed from a battle between the thunderbirds of the sky, the giant birds, and the sea serpents of the water. The thunderbirds were said to drop giant boulders down on the sea serpents. The sea serpents shot up giant spouts of water at the thunderbirds. The legend tells that the sea serpents won and the thunderbirds flew off out of the area, and the sea serpents remained at Devil's Lake. Some of the earliest oral tales of the first people there told of their fear of the giant leviathan of the deep in the lake. One tale tells of a man going down to the water's edge, and it was foaming up like it was boiling. Curiosity got the better of him. He walked out a little bit, only to be snatched by a tentacle and pulled out and drowned in the water. Others who lost their lives drowning or capsized their canoes often had it blamed on the hideous monster of the deep. But these stories continued as the white pioneers moved into the area. One of my favorite stories was documented in the 1892 newspapers around the area. They reported a group of men out fishing in their boat when all of a sudden they saw a gigantic monster rise out of the water. It was moving toward them, and it was darting back and forth as though it was looking for someone or something. As it was getting close and they were starting to become terrified, they noticed what it was looking for. Another nearly identical creature came up, and the two started fighting to their death. The waves were so high from their fight, the boat almost capsized. Finally, the two descended into the waters and were not seen the rest of that day. People have found weird things in the lake. Back in 1901, a man was convinced he had seen a small alligator maneuvering its way through Devil's Lake. Of course, alligators would have a hard time surviving Wisconsin's winters. And the stories continued through the early 1900s. One of my favorite tales of Devil's Lake tells of the lake being haunted. On especially foggy days, those who visit the lake often report seeing what appears to be a native man in a dugout canoe paddling across the lake. But when they try to get a closer look, he simply vanishes into thin air. More recently, people have told the story of a spirit haunting the campground at Devil's Lake State Park. The legend is that this spirit, and whether it's the same native person or not, I don't know, but that spirit wanders the campground searching for the best fire in the campground to haunt those around the fire. So I always encourage people, if they're going to camp at the park, make sure your neighbors have a slightly better fire than you do, so they will be cursed with this spirit and not you. If you're looking to go look for some ghosts this Halloween season, I recommend you head to Portage, Wisconsin, to a place called Church Road. Actually, I recommend you don't go to this place because in order to get there, you have to drive out into the middle of nowhere. Then you take a dead end road until you come to the end, and off to your left, you will see a tiny little cemetery, secluded, surrounded by trees. But the hauntings may begin before you even get to the cemetery. The legend tells many years ago, a distraught young girl went out to the cemetery. But before she got there, she grabbed a rope, threw it around the tree, and took her life at the end of that rope. Now, many people who go there report seeing the ghostly image of that young girl hanging from the tree. Others will see a noose vanish right before their eyes. But if you do see her spirit, don't let it dissuade you from going to the cemetery, because it's here all kinds of oddities are said to happen. Weird balls of light, mysterious voices coming from the woods, all kinds of weirdness, including what happened to my colleague Terry Fisk when I first brought him there. We were going there and he walked to the back of the cemetery when all of a sudden he stepped into an area and felt like he was going to vomit and throw up. Suddenly he was ill. As he walked back, he was fine. He went to show me it, and when he walked in, he felt ill again. Luckily, I had no such feelings of vomiting or illness. We didn't know it at the time, but many others have felt getting sick for some unknown reason while visiting this cemetery. And don't worry, it's so secluded and so rural, nobody will bother you while you're there. At least not anyone who's alive. If you're making your way across Wisconsin and find yourself near Highway 66 in Stevens Point, you may want to avoid it because the locals, they don't call it Highway 66. They call it Bloody Bride Bridge. The legend tells that many years ago, a young woman on her wedding night was coming home late in the evening when she was involved in a car accident on this very bridge, and she bled to death waiting for help to arrive. Ever since that moment, many unsuspecting motorists driving their car across the bridge reported seeing what appeared to be a woman in a bloody bridal gown walking across the bridge, vanishing into thin air. One of the first witnesses was said to be a law enforcement officer who was driving over the bridge late at night when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a woman in a bridal gown appeared in front of him. He slammed on his brakes, closed his eyes, and braced for impact. And when he came to a screeching halt, he got out to see the damage and to help the victim. But when he got out, nobody was there. No damage to his vehicle whatsoever. He left the area convinced he had run over the bloody bride of the bridge. But the dare gets even better here. And the dare tells that if you park your car on the bridge, if you turn it off and look into your back mirror, not only will you see the ghost of that bloody bride, but many witnesses claim that she was actually sitting right in their back seat. Now, luckily or unluckily for me, knock on wood, the dozen or so times I've waited for her, she has not appeared for me, but maybe she will for you. But please be careful. If you're going to try this dare, watch out. This is a very busy bridge these days. I would not want to have to put you in my next program as another ghost haunting this bridge. So if you're going to take these dares, do so at your own risk. One of the first cases I ever started investigating was 25 years ago, and it's a case I'm still researching today. Right outside of my hometown of Eau Claire is a small town called Elk Lake Dam. This is where people go to relax. Don't worry, there's nothing to see in this photo. And that's exactly what two men were doing, where the first arrow on the bottom points to. They were sitting there enjoying the beautiful area, relaxing. That is until one of them turned around, and where the second arrow is, he noticed what appeared to be a glowing woman in white standing behind him. He nudged his buddy and said, "Hey, do you know there's a glowing woman behind us?" His buddy said, "Yes, but I'm too afraid to turn around and look." About a half hour went by. They finally got the collective courage to turn around and look. The woman was gone. So were the two men, one of which was so frightened he would not even bring us back to show us where the event took place. Luckily, the other one did. At the time, I was a UW Stout student in the psychology program. One of the cohorts in my program was a young man named Aaron. He believed he was psychic. He was intuitive. So I brought him on the investigation that evening. Aaron and I wanted to take a photograph of where the two men would have been sitting. We were going to take a photograph of each other. But as you can see here, his camera malfunctioned. It was working before, worked after, but it would not snap a photo. Luckily, my camera did. And when the film came back, this is when people actually used film, we noticed this weird mist or fog where the two men saw that woman that evening, even though I didn't see anything with the naked eye when the photo was taken. So I started talking about this case quite a bit. After a program, a gentleman came up to me and told me that he lived out there in the 1970s. He recalled there was a murder out there, but that's all he could remember. So I started digging through the old newspaper archives, only to find out that he was right. In 1974, unfortunately, there was a murder out there. A young woman was murdered, but not just any nameless, faceless young women. It was this young woman. Her name was Mary. She was hitchhiking from Minneapolis to Chicago. Last seen being picked up on the side of the road by this gentleman who was last seen kicking dirt and leaves over something. Neighbors thought it was suspicious in this very rural area. They called the police. By the time the police got there, the man was gone and the body of Mary was on the ground dead. She had been stabbed to death. And even though they had a witness description of the man, he was never captured and the case went unsolved. It was at that time I decided to go back to the location. If the place was haunted, maybe it was haunted by this Mary. So I brought Aaron, the psychic, with me again. He wanted me to take a photograph of this pillar. which I did. I took dozens that evening. This is the only one out of the ordinary. Again, some weird mist or fog. It was also here where we all heard the sound of a scream that sounded part like a human woman, but also almost a recording of some sort. It didn't sound quite human. But as we were leaving, Aaron believed that the spirit of this woman was going to try to follow us back to campus. So we snapped one last photograph, and I'll let you decide whether or not she was following us back, because when the film came back, this is what appeared. Many people have seen shapes and figures and faces in this. But the good news is that so many people like yourselves have gone out to this place. So many media outlets have covered this story that the local sheriff's department recently reopened the case into her murder, looking for her killer. They even dug up her body looking for DNA evidence, which they did not find. Hopefully, they can find the killer and give this spirit some peace and rest as it deserves. Believe it or not, this is the most common question I receive. Where can I go to spend the night in a haunted place? Well, if you have that kind of macabre sense of adventure, you're in luck, because in Wisconsin, we have tons of haunted lodging options. Hotels, motels, B&Bs, resorts, campgrounds, and the like. One of my favorite places is a place you can go. It's called the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee. Today, it's a fine establishment, upscale. You'll love staying there. But back in the 1970s and 80s, it was a cesspool. They rented the place out to criminals, drug dealers, prostitutes, and serial killers. This is Jeffrey Dahmer, the cannibal of Milwaukee. Dahmer spent many nights at the Ambassador. One night, back in 1987, he went out drinking and brought this gentleman back to his hotel room. They drank the night away. The next morning, Dahmer awoke and found the man dead. Dahmer claimed he had no recollection as to what had happened. But instead of going to the police and explaining the accident, Dahmer went out and bought the biggest trunk he could find, came back and chopped the man up and put him in the trunk. Ever since that moment, people believe that the place has been haunted. Many will call in complaining about the room next to them fighting to their death. But oftentimes, there are no guests staying next to them. Others see the ghostly image of a man covered in blood walking through the hallways. He often vanishes right into a wall or disappears into thin air. He's thought to be one of the victims, as we don't know how many others Dahmer may have killed at the Ambassador. Others claim to have seen the spirit of Dahmer himself walking through the old hallways and the old lobby. So again, if this is the way you love to travel, you will not be disappointed staying at the Ambassador Hotel. Sometimes legends seem to be more frequent during certain times of the year. That's exactly what is going on with Marsh Road right outside of New London. It's one of those lonely roads that people avoid at all costs. Unless, of course, you're looking for a supernatural adventure. Then they flock out there. It received its name because all around on either side are marshlands, hence the name Marsh Road. The story goes back many generations. The most common story tells that in October, during homecoming week, the newly crowned king and queen of the homecoming festival went out to the road in a suicide pact. They took ropes and ended their life at the end of the rope. Now, if you go out there, especially in October during homecoming time, you will see the ghostly images of that homecoming king and queen haunting the road. But dating back to the same period as the stories of the homecoming royalty ghouls, is the story of something else being out on the road, something that witnesses see that shouldn't be there, something that couldn't be there, but yet witnesses are staring face to face at it. So, what are these witnesses seeing? Well, maybe I better let you just take a look. This creature, called the Goat Man, sometimes half human, half goat, with the upper torso being human or the upper torso being goat, or vice versa. It's been seen so many times that the legend has sprung up that it was not a suicide pact that had done in the homecoming king and queen, but they ventured out to the road and were victims of the Goat Man. And when the authorities found their partially devoured and ripped apart bodies, they blamed it on a suicide to stop panic from people out there with the Goat Man. Regardless of whether or not you believe these stories, I have to tell you, this is a pretty creepy area. If you're out walking the road at midnight by yourself, every little snap of the twig in the forest has your mind conjuring up images that the phantom Goat Man will come after you. It's a lot of fun. I recommend trying it out. Right outside of Menominee is one of my favorite places in all of Wisconsin, an old abandoned island called Mary Dean. At one time, an entire town lived out on this island. It was named after a young girl by the name of Mary Dean. It was said that she drowned while coming up on a steamboat and that her body was buried in an unmarked grave on the island. As I said, an entire town lived out there at one point. Now it's abandoned, but maybe not empty. See, many believe that the spirit of Mary Dean continues to haunt the island and the water where she met her end. But there's a dare here as well. And the dare is a lot of fun about Mary Dean. So what is the dare of Mary Dean? Well, let's take a look. I'm here at the boat landing of Mary Dean, where the dare is that if you're foolish enough to go into the water, the vengeful spirit of Mary Dean will try to pull you under, and you'll meet your watery grave and spend eternity in the river with Mary Dean. So I'm going to take this dare right now. No life jacket, no swimming apparel, just me versus Mary Dean. So let's see how this goes. I know you're all wondering if I survive this or not, but it will get deep and then shallow and then deeper as I make my way to the middle. What I love about this is you can camp on the island. You don't need to register. You don't need to pay. You can simply camp. My advice is watch out for all the wood ticks, but it's a great place to spend the evening. Those who see the spirit of Mary out there claim that she acts like a siren, trying to entice you in. She says things like, "Help me, I can't swim, I'm drowning, please don't save me," or "Please come and save me." And legend is, if you do, again, she'll pull you under. Every year, several people drown right in this location. When I've talked to their friends or family, they told me the person was drawn out there for some unknown reason. I'm out here in the middle of the river, waiting for Mary Dean to pull me under. So I wait out there quite some time, and then I make my way back to the safety of the shore. Well, thankfully, the spirit of Mary Dean did not pull me under into those dark, churning, cold waters of the river. So another dare completed. If you like seeing dares like that, you can go to my website and see me do dozens of dares from around the world. You don't have to risk your own life. But believe it or not, the story gets even better, because it was said that when the island was inhabited, there were dogs out on the island, and those dogs mauled some children, and they had to be put to death, the dogs. Now, the legend states that if you park your car at the boat landing of Mary Dean, not only will you see the ghost of Mary Dean herself, but you might encounter what many people are calling the hellhounds of Mary Dean. Maybe. There we go. Glowing red-eyed black dogs. They've been reported throughout history in nearly every culture on the planet. Many believe that these creatures do the devil's bidding. Many see them out there with their glowing red eyes. But again, if you'd rather not go looking for hellhounds, maybe try your luck at the Beast of Bray Road. Thanks to my good friend and colleague, the Beast of Bray Road may be Wisconsin's most infamous creature. It began when Linda was working as a journalist near Elkhorn, and people started reporting traveling down the small stretch of rural road called Bray Road. There, usually at night, but not always, they reported seeing, for a lack of a better term, a giant werewolf-type creature. Sometimes it would be eating roadkill or freshly killed prey. But the good news is that outside of charging at a couple vehicles, the creature seemed to be just as afraid of witnesses as witnesses are of it. And rather than attack people, it seems to rather scurry into the underbrush undetected. So the good news is, if you go looking for these creatures on Bray Road, most likely you won't die. Well, 50-50. Give it a try. Pretty good odds. But not all monsters tend to look like this. In fact, some monsters of Wisconsin look a little bit more like this. For those of you who do not recognize this gentleman, this is Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield. If you don't recall Ed's story back in the 1950s, you may recall some of the movies they based on his life, including Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Silence of the Lambs, and many, many others. Most people just think of Ed as a murderer, and true he was, but before he was captured, he was well liked in Plainfield. Odd, but well liked. He would babysit for kids and bring his neighbors over what he called a venison stew for them to eat. One neighbor told me he recalled his mother getting this stew. It had such a horrible smell to it, she threw it away, which is good for her because even though Ed was a killer, his real passion was to wait until it got dark. Then he would fire up his vehicle, head down to the nearby cemeteries where he would dig up the graves of women. He would then bring them back to his farmhouse where he lived in squalor, turning the bodies into lampshades and furniture for his home. But when he had skulls all over his house, and when he got a bug in his system, he would make an entire outfit of this material, and he would wear it like a demented Halloween costume as he danced under the moonlight in his front yard. But you see, when we finally caught Gein and discovered how truly evil his crimes were, they wanted to open his house as a museum of horrors that you could pay to go see. But before they were able to do so, it mysteriously burned to the ground. The townsfolk torched it, allegedly. But even though Gein is no longer with us in the living world, his farm has been burned down for many years. Many believe that he has forever cursed Plainfield with his hideous crimes. And maybe they're right. People go out to the old cemeteries where he dug up bodies, and they see what appears to be a gravedigger digging a grave by hand, only to have that person vanish right before their eyes. Many people take a trip out to Gein's gravesite. The headstone's no longer there. People kept stealing it, but you'll see he's buried there on his family plot. Others believe the old hardware store where he killed Mrs. Warden is haunted. For years, this, until recently, operated as a hardware store. Former staff members told us they'd often have things go flying across the room, or while doing inventory, things would move on their own as though thrown by some unseen force. Sometimes they would see what appeared to be a woman walk into the store and then vanish right into thin air, thought to be one of Gein's victims, Mrs. Warden, that he killed at her hardware store. The place is empty. The hardware store recently moved out. Last time I was there, the building was for sale if you're looking to own a piece of Wisconsin's grisly history. But the most popular, if you can call it that, place in Plainfield is Gein's old estate. Many people go there thinking it's haunted. They claim they've seen the spirit of Gein himself walking the farmland. Others have heard the cries of women thought to be his victims out on the land. But if you're going to go there, don't do it on Halloween. You'll probably get more of a trespassing ticket than you would a ghost story if you go there on All Hallows Eve. But as I'm running low on time this evening, I want to end on the most common report I receive, because the overwhelming majority of people that contact me about a haunting, it's not about a serial killer, a murder, an untimely death, an accident, a suicide, a mob hit. It's about their house being haunted. Some believe it's a relative. They smell grandma's perfume on the anniversary of her death, or grandpa's cigar smoke on his birthday. Others have no idea who or what may be haunting their house. Believe it or not, some are okay with their house being haunted. It doesn't bother them. They're used to it. Others will do whatever they can to get the spirit out of their place. But if you take one story away with you tonight, this is the story I hope you take. Because tonight, later, when all of you put your head down on your pillows and you hear the wind rustling outside your window, I want you to ask yourself, maybe, is it just possible that that wasn't the wind howling outside your window, and maybe you are living in a haunted house as well? So with that, I wanted to save the last few minutes we have for any questions, comments, or stories that any of you might have. You can start typing them into the chat room right now, but I hope your adventure doesn't end here tonight after this program. Grab one of my books, go on your own adventure of Wisconsin. And when you do, I think you'll discover that we live in one heck of a weird state. And I mean that in a good way. You're going to see things you've never seen. You'll meet some odd people. And along the way, you might just discover that the scariest thing out there is often yourself. So with that, I again want to thank the library for having me here for this program. I cannot think of a time in history where the library has served a more important role than it does today. With everything going on with the pandemic, politics, societal issues, the library is that fabric that keeps our communities together, a real treasure for any community that has one. So if you like programs like this, let them know so you get more of these. If you didn't like tonight's program, let them know so you get fewer of these. But either way, to show my appreciation, if you want to pick up any of my books on my website, all you have to do is type in the coupon code LIBRARY and you'll save 15% off any of my books for this Halloween season. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the library and we'll see if we have any questions or stories.
Awesome. Thank you for the wonderful presentation, Chad. I do have a few questions coming in. I'll just go through them in order. So the first one is, could you talk about Sherry Wild and her alien abductions?
I'm not familiar with Wild and her abduction. That's a great story. I'd love to hear more. So whoever asked that, please contact me about that. And that's what I love about this field is I've been doing this 25 years, thousands of stories from Wisconsin, but every time I do a program, someone has something new that they can tell me that I had not heard of before. Great. Yeah, please contact me about that.
Cool. Okay. So the next question is from Mona. So have you actually seen anything?
Great question. The simple answer is no. Most of the time when I go to these places, if something happens, it's really subtle. Like the balls of light you saw, or the mist or fog, or psychics I bring with claim they've been pushed or pinched, or will capture weird audio on our recorders that we couldn't hear with the naked ear. But it's always enough just to make you think, was that paranormal or something else? So But people often ask, do you ever get scared at these places? And I always state, if you're going to these places and you're not getting scared, you're not trying hard enough. These are just downright creepy places.
Okay. And then from Gail, have you heard of the circus wintering grounds haunting?
Yeah, well, Delavan had some circus grounds, but you're probably referring to the Baraboo Ringling Brothers Circus Grounds, which is now Circus World Museum and operating circus. And yes, I did a book on Bizarre Baraboo in the Dells, and Circus World has a ton of old stories from Al Ringling himself, his spirit thought to be there, into a phantom elephant that they used to house on the grounds there. People would see this elephant. One woman in the old days claimed it even smashed through her garage, tearing it apart before vanishing into thin air. Yeah, a lot of fun of Baraboo.
Cool. All right. So from Leah, have you been to the Karsten Hotel?
Yeah, the historic Karsten and Kewanee over on the eastern portion of the state, great old historic hotel, thought to be haunted by several spirits, including a woman. It was one time when I was there with a colleague, it was about 2 a.m. We were in the room. We just finished an investigation of the place and we're getting ready to bunker down, try to catch some Z's for the night. And we had our recorders going when all of a sudden it sounded like somebody had stuck some boots in a dryer. All of a sudden, boom, 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 boom in our room. We could never figure out what it was, but it got our adrenaline going for the night. Yeah, I love the Karsten. Great place to visit.
Okay. From Heather, do you know if Ed Gein haunts Mendona Mental Hospital?
I have not heard any stories of Gein. For some reason, he was deemed too insane to stand trial. So they brought him to the Mendota psychiatric hospital. And I talked to nurses that worked there when he was there and said he was this quiet, unassuming man, but you could just see in his eyes that something wasn't quite right. And oftentimes they would have dances, and the nurses were encouraged to dance with their patients. And believe it or not, Gein was not a favorite dance partner for a lot of these women.
Oh my goodness. No, I guess not. So from Beth, have you heard anything about Washington Island in Door County? I guess there are a lot of haunted places there.
You can't throw a rock in Door County without hitting a place with a haunted story. One of my favorite places is up on Washington Island, Nelson's Bitter End Motel and Nelson's Hall, a saloon. They sell more bitters there per capita than anywhere in the world. And you can join the Bitters Club, and you join it by doing a shot of bitters. You don't throw up, you're in the club. And Old Man Nelson's thought to be haunting the place. And outside of, people having weird stuff with music changing stations on its own and chairs moving on their own and bottles being thrown by some unseen force, a lot of people actually have experiences in the bathroom. A lot of women, believe it or not, report seeing the ghostly image of a man lurking over them in the bathroom, which is a terrifying thought for many people using the restroom. But Nelson's Hall's great. There's a woman named Gretchen that haunts Washington Island as well. A lot of good ghost tours, trolleys, and walking tours on Door County as well.
Okay. So Danielle has questions. She is wanting more information on the Bray Road monster.
So the Beast of Bray Road seems to date back many decades. Linda first started reporting on it in the 1980s. And people have experiences of seeing something big, the size of a big bear, but again, shaped more like a wolf with a long muzzle and this deep, dark, matted down fur. What terrifies a lot of witnesses that I've spoken with is the fact that they claim that this creature or creatures is a biped running upright on its hind legs like you and I do. And it doesn't seem to be bound by physics here on Earth. And that goes for a lot of these creatures. There's a place in Iowa called Terror Bridge that has a werewolf story. And a woman told me her and her friends saw this werewolf, and they hightailed it out of there doing about 55 on this dirt road. And the creature kept up with them as though it wasn't even trying to run, easily kept up with them. And she was terrified by it. And since Linda's books have come out, I've received reports of these werewolf type beings all over the US. So it's not just Bray Road anymore.
Ooh, that's terrifying. So from Kylie, we have a question. Have you visited Sanitarium Hill? And if yes, have you had any experiences?
Again, no experiences there. A lot of people contact me and they have experiences, but myself, again, you would think just out of dumb luck going to these places, thousands of them, something would happen, but no experiences that I could say would be 100% paranormal there.
From Carrie, do you know of the haunting of the Astor Hotel in Milwaukee and the UFO sighting in Belleville?
Ooh, Belleville, yeah, local law enforcement officer saw it there, and the same with Elmwood. And we often, which is another one of our capitals of the world for UFOs. And what I love about these sightings is that they're from credible researchers and investigators that police officers, firefighters, pilots, men and women that are trained observers, when they have a story, we end up giving it more credibility because they are trained observers. And many people believed his story down in Bellevue, which is one of the reasons they have a UFO Day festival every year. Obviously, with COVID, that didn't happen this year, but next year, hopefully watch the sky.
Okay, from Chris, another haunted hotel is Walker House in Mineral Point. Have you been there?
The old Walker House is a beautiful historic place in Mineral Point. Walker House is thought to have one of the oldest ghosts in Wisconsin, a man that was killed out front on a funeral out there going on. And I have some colleagues who spend every Halloween there for like the last decade, and they often have little things happen. It's a hotel where you rent a room, but nobody stays there the whole night in terms of staff. The owners go home, so you have the place to yourself, and people often hear footsteps coming down empty hallways and just a creepy old feel. And if you're going to the Walker, if you're in Mineral Point, stop by the Graceland Cemetery. That's where they believe a vampire is lurking as well, first seen by Officer Pepper back in the 1980s. So you can get a double bonus there at the Walker.
Okay. So Sandra writes, what is your experience / interpretation of a water serpent that looks like a lizard with sharp pointy teeth? Maybe a Native American lore animal / spirit?
A lot of people have brought up the idea that it would be a water panther, you know, the old native spirit, almost acting like some sort of siren, enticing people to the water and then costing them their lives. And the problem I have with sea serpent stories, I've collected so many, is that they seem to be there when the witness sees them. They're convinced they've seen a flesh and blood animal, but yet it can go decades between sightings. No body has washed up, almost as though these things are there, but they're not there. And that's the real trouble with them, is that you would think if there's a 50-foot monster shaped like the Loch Ness Monster in some of these relatively small lakes, that they'd be seen more often or that they'd be filmed or captured. But yet we have none of that. So it's just very puzzling to me, even though sea serpents are probably my favorite thing to research.
Okay, so Julia asks, do you have any stories from the Pfister Hotel in Milwaukee?
Pfister Hotel is another one of those amazing places to stay. Many believe it's haunted by Mr. Pfister. And believe it or not, people see phantom dogs at the Pfister. And staff told me that oftentimes all the photos throughout the historic building, that they always seem to be askew, that no matter how many times they straighten them, they have to go and straighten them again because they go off kilter. Of course, Pfister is well known because most of the teams that come in to play the Brewers stay at the Pfister, although many of them refuse to stay there because it's so haunted, which I think should be a rule that they have to stay there to give the Brewers an edge if we can get it. But Pfister's a wonderful place to stay.
Okay. And then Stacy asks about the Morris Pratt Institute in Whitewater.
Whitewater, also known as Second Salem, does have the Morris Pratt Institute, which many years ago focused on New Age, psychics, intuitives, and the whole spiritualist movement as well. And the town of Whitewater is thought to be haunted itself, that there are many graveyards that surround the Witches Tower, which is their water tower, thought to be protecting the witches from getting out of that area. University of Whitewater is also said to have a Book of the Dead that if you check it out, it will kill you. I don't know who keeps returning it, but it's there. Of course, the librarians say there is no book. They don't have one, which is exactly what you would expect librarians to say that are guarding a book to the dead, but maybe you can check it out for yourself.
As a librarian, I would say, here, go ahead, take the book.
Yeah, get it off your hands.
Okay, so questions are still coming in. How long do you want to take questions for?
Let's do another one.
Okay. So Danielle asks, I've been told because of my severe anxiety that spirits can attach to people. So do you believe that?
Well, again, this is all speculation, but one of the theories is that spirits can, I guess, attach to you or communicate with you or interact with you in times of great either spiritual drama or emotional or mental distress. And maybe it's something about how our brain operates that a lot of people feel that when you're entering a dream state, that's when these spirits can communicate. So people that do have anxiety or that are stressed out, which is in these days, everybody, spirits might be able to attach. And that's one of the things people use to help cleanse themselves from spirits is something of like burning sage to cleanse yourself, or just relaxing, meditation, going to the spa when you're able to do that kind of thing. So I think that is certainly a possibility. If they feed off of energy, which some believe they do, it would make sense that they would do it when you're on high alert or high energy.
Okay, I'm kind of scrolling through here to see if because there's a lot of questions still coming in. Ever been to EJ asks, have you ever been to the First Ward School in Wisconsin Rapids?
I have not been there. That's another one I'd love to hear more of. And what I love too about this is there are really no old theaters or sanatoriums or mental institutions that don't have a haunted story to them. Unfortunately, many of them are being torn down now for safety precautions, and we're losing a lot of historical places. But until then, if something's old and abandoned, it's probably haunted.
So Beth asks, what do you think is the most valuable piece of equipment for doing investigations?
For me, it's a sense of curiosity and common sense and a sense of adventure. But in terms of like real equipment, I used to bring a lot more equipment than I do today. And what I found is I was spending so much time setting up the equipment, monitoring it, and breaking it down that I would miss the legend. So today I'm out there usually with nothing more than a video camera, a camera, and a notebook, maybe an audio recorder, sometimes motion detectors or cameras, trail cameras or game cameras as they're known. But a lot of the time, again, I'm using a notebook. I've interviewed witnesses with it. I've used it to start campfires, you name it. So I think too many people get dissuaded by TV shows where they have $20,000 of equipment and they think, I don't want to spend that to go ghost hunting. But some of the best research ever done was in the 1920s by candlelight, where they sprinkled flour on the floor to make sure no one walked by. So get out there. Don't let anything hold you back, especially equipment, because there's no piece of equipment that will tell you ghosts exist.
There's still some more questions about different locations. Have you been to Angela asks, have you been to the Manitowoc Hotel or the old hotel near the Maribel Caves?
Yeah, Hotel Hell, as it's known by Maribel Caves. There's not much left of it. Tornado took down most of it a few years back, and before that, it was in disrepair. But many believe there's a portal to hell there. And I've talked to people whose grandparents were married at the hotel, and it was a place for the rich and famous to come in the early 1900s because they used it as a spa for the well next door, the fresh spring. And people go out there, and when you used to be able to walk through the remains, the legend was that if you brought a book with you, no matter what book it was, even a holy book, it would burst into flames as you walk through the building. So that was always a fun one to walk through. But now, unfortunately, there's not much left.
Okay. So I'll just do two more questions here. Do you have any information on the Lamount Maison, or I believe it is also called Summerwind?
Summerwind Mansion, again, not much is left, way up in the north of the state, up by Land O'Lakes area. At one time, it was thought to be the most haunted house in America. That previous owners were so afraid of ghosts in the house, they shot at it with guns. And there used to be a bunch of bullet holes in the doors that you could see. But again, there's not much there. But those who go there and see the chimney and the foundation, a lot of them have told me they felt drawn there, like pulled there. They had seen an article or a news report and they felt they had to go there. But just as many people report to me that once they got there, they felt they shouldn't be there and they headed home.
Okay, so KBD really wanted to hear about JFK Preparatory School in St. Nazan.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it. Nazianz.
Yeah, JFK Prep and St. Nazians.
Oh. She put the pronunciation in the chat now, so thanks.
Yeah, that helps. Yeah, that's a beautiful place. Again, it's privately owned. I don't know what they're doing with it now. I was there 15 years ago when they were trying to make it into a tourist stop and they had so much asbestos. I don't know what they're going to do, but there's stories of nuns and priests haunting the place. Also, there was a room where the devil was said to have shown up years ago. And if you live in the Manitowoc area on the eastern portion of the state, it was almost a rite of passage to go there as a young kid. Test of bravery for teenagers, but they had a lot of vandalism and set up a lot of motion detectors, and the police used to patrol it quite a bit. So, but I don't know if they're doing tours again. I haven't followed up on it in a few years, but oftentimes they would allow people to do tours, or you could come check it out if you did some manual labor there.
Wow. Well, you just have so much knowledge of all this creepy stuff. It's really great for our audience here tonight. Thanks for staying late and answering some questions. I will give you a copy of the questions because there might be a couple things in there you hadn't heard of before. I think Heidi got back about the woman who was alien abducted or something like that. So I'll send you a copy of the chat. And so for folks, feel free to reach out to Chad. And this is great. Really, really great. Thank you so much for the presentation tonight. And thanks for joining us tonight. I know there's a lot of other stuff to do. I will be posting the recording later this week. Hopefully tomorrow, and I'll email everybody who registered the link to the recording. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening.